He was just out for a jog. No weapon. No threat. Just running. But minutes later, 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery lay dying on a quiet Georgia street, chased, cornered, and shot by two white men in pickup trucks. They claimed it was self-defense. The police didn't arrest them. The DA looked the other way. And for 74 days, nothing happened. Until one video changed everything. This is not just a story of a murder, it's a story of a system designed to look away, until the truth made it impossible. Ahmaud Arbery was 25 years old. He lived in Brunswick, Georgia, a small coastal town where everybody seemed to know everybody, and routines were part of life. For Ahmaud, one of those routines was jogging. He was a former high school football player who had stayed active long after graduation, often seen running through neighborhoods, headphones in, mind focused. For those who knew him, he was soft-spoken, respectful, and focused on building a future. He wasn't perfect, but who is? He was a young black man trying to live his life in a town that still carried the echoes of deep-rooted division. On February 23, 2020, Ahmaud went out for a jog in the Satilla Shores neighborhood, a mostly white, middle-class community just a few miles from his home. It was the kind of quiet neighborhood with winding roads, dog walkers, and families in driveways. As he ran past certain houses, two men inside one of them, a former police officer named Greg McMichael and his son, Travis, claimed they saw him and believed he resembled someone who had been caught on security cameras inside a home under construction nearby. There had been no report of theft. Nothing had been taken. But suspicion alone was enough for them to act. Greg and Travis grabbed their guns and jumped into a pickup truck. According to them, they wanted to stop Ahmaud for questioning, what they referred to as a citizen's arrest. Georgia law at the time allowed citizens to detain someone they suspected of committing a crime, provided it was done immediately after the offense. But there was no evidence Ahmaud had done anything. He had no weapons, no stolen items, nothing except gym clothes and running shoes. Still, they followed him. As they pursued him down the street, a third man, William Roddy Bryan, saw the chase and joined in, filming from his own truck. The chase turned from a suspicion into a coordinated confrontation. Travis stood in the bed of the pickup, armed. Greg stood in the cab with a revolver. Roddy's vehicle cut off possible escape from behind. Ahmaud ran, tried to avoid them, but eventually found himself trapped. Moments later, gunshots rang out. Travis McMichael pulled the trigger. Ahmaud fell, bleeding into the street. He never got back up. Within minutes, the Glynn County Police Department arrived on scene. But instead of arresting the shooters, they accepted the McMichaels' explanation. They claimed self-defense, that Ahmaud had attacked them. The officers didn't press charges. They took statements and let the men go home that day. No arrest. No urgency. No justice. The incident was filed away as a tragic confrontation gone wrong. Ahmaud's mother, Wanda Cooper Jones, got the news no mother should ever receive. Her son had been killed. But when she asked questions, who did this, why, what was being done, she was met with vague answers and closed doors. The district attorney assigned to the case, Jackie Johnson, had once worked with Greg McMichael when he was an investigator in her office. She later recused herself, but not before allegedly telling police not to arrest the McMichaels. The case was passed to another DA, George Barnhill, who also had ties to the McMichaels. He too recused himself, but not before writing a letter saying the shooting was justified. Days turned into weeks. The story barely made headlines. In Glynn County, it seemed like business as usual. Ahmaud Arbery was gone, but the men who killed him were free, shielded by legal connections and a culture of protection. His family pleaded for justice, but without proof, their voices were ignored. There was no video in the public eye yet. No national outrage. Just silence, grief, and a quiet neighborhood that had returned to normal as if nothing had happened. But beneath the surface, something was beginning to shift. People were asking questions. Ahmaud's name started to appear on social media. Journalists started digging. Civil rights activists began to take interest. What happened on that street didn't sit right. There was no arrest, no trial, and a vague self-defense claim that didn't add up. The more people looked, the more troubling the silence became. At that point, what remained was a familiar pattern. A black man was dead. His killers were known. Law enforcement had connections with the accused. And for 74 days, no one was held accountable. But the calm wouldn't last. A video existed. And once the world saw it, the silence would shatter. For 74 days after Ahmaud Arbery was shot and killed, nothing happened. His family waited. The community whispered. Officials deflected. And the legal system stood still. It wasn't just a failure of action, it was a coordinated silence, powered by relationships, influence, and an old system of protection that had deep roots in the region. Greg McMichael had worked in law enforcement for decades. He was a retired investigator for the Brunswick District Attorney's Office and had previously served as a police officer. His ties to the Glynn County legal system were strong and long-standing. When the shooting occurred, his name wasn't just on the police report, it echoed in the offices of people who owed him favors, shared history, or simply didn't want to challenge the old guard. It wasn't just about race. It was about power. After the police declined to arrest the McMichaels, the case was handed to District Attorney Jackie Johnson. She had worked with Greg McMichael directly. According to later investigations, she instructed officers not to arrest him. Instead of recusing herself immediately due to the conflict of interest, she delayed, only stepping aside after public scrutiny began to build. By then, valuable time had been lost, and the groundwork for delay had already been laid. The case was then transferred to George Barnhill, the Waycross Judicial Circuit DA. He also had a son who worked in the same office as Greg McMichael, yet this conflict was not disclosed right away. Before recusing himself, Barnhill wrote a letter justifying the shooting. He claimed the McMichaels were within their rights to pursue Ahmaud under Georgia's citizens arrest law and argued that Travis McMichael had fired in self-defense. That letter would later be used by supporters of the McMichaels to frame the killing as legally permissible, despite mounting public concern. Ahmaud's family didn't have access to the political influence or institutional leverage that the McMichaels did. But they had determination, and they refused to let the story fade. Wanda Cooper-Jones, Ahmaud's mother, reached out to journalists, activists, and attorneys. She called for transparency, and slowly, others began to listen. Her voice, clear, steady, and heartbroken, carried the weight of a truth no parent should have to speak. Her son was hunted and killed, and the men responsible were still free. Civil rights organizations, including the NAACP and the Southern Center for Human Rights, began monitoring the case. Local black community leaders started organizing. Online, people started asking questions using hashtags, sharing news clippings, and amplifying the story. But still, with no footage available to the public and no new action from law enforcement, outrage remained simmering below the surface. That would soon change. In early May 2020, more than 2 months after Ahmaud's death, a video surfaced, filmed by William Roddy Bryan, the man who had joined the pursuit and recorded the killing. The video showed Ahmaud jogging down the road, the McMichaels' truck parked in the middle of the street, and the moment when Travis McMichael confronted him with a shotgun. The struggle was brief. 3 gunshots rang out. Ahmaud stumbled and collapsed. The footage was graphic, shocking, and undeniable. It destroyed any illusion that this had been a lawful attempt at detaining a suspect. Ahmaud was clearly unarmed, outnumbered, and running for his life. The video went viral within hours. News outlets picked up the story. Social media erupted in outrage. The nation had seen many disturbing videos before, but this one hit a particular nerve. The image of a black man being hunted and gunned down in daylight on a quiet street felt like a modern-day lynching caught on tape. Pressure mounted instantly. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp was forced to respond. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, took over the case, and within 48 hours of the video's release, the McMichaels were finally arrested. More than 2 months had passed since the killing, but only after public exposure and widespread fury did the justice system move. The delay in arrests raised hard questions. Why did it take a viral video for action to be taken? Why were conflicts of interest allowed to stall the investigation for so long? Why had local law enforcement and prosecutors tried to sweep the case under the rug? For Ahmaud's family, the arrests were a step toward justice, but not closure. The truth was now public, but the pain remained. They had fought for weeks while those in power protected their own. They had begged for transparency while others looked the other way. And they had waited, not knowing if anyone would ever care. But the world was now watching. Ahmaud Arbery's name was being chanted at protests, printed on signs, and etched into the nation's memory. A case that had once been ignored had become a symbol of something bigger, the collision between race, power, and delayed justice in modern America. As the video of Ahmaud Arbery's killing continued to circulate, the nation was shaken. The footage didn't just document a crime, it exposed a pattern, one where justice often depended on public outrage rather than the justice system itself. People took to the streets. Rallies were held in major cities. Protesters carried signs that read, "I run with Maud," symbolizing solidarity with a young black man who had been killed for doing something as ordinary as jogging. The timing of the video's release collided with a broader national crisis. Just weeks later, the world would watch as George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, reigniting a global movement for racial justice. Ahmaud's death, already a flashpoint in Georgia, became part of a larger cry against systemic racism, policing failures, and unequal justice. His name was now being chanted alongside Breonna Taylor's and George Floyd's, part of a tragic trio that fueled months of mass protests and reckoning. Under public and political pressure, the state moved quickly. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation arrested Greg and Travis McMichael, and shortly afterward, William "Roddy" Bryan was also arrested and charged. Prosecutors alleged that Bryan not only filmed the incident but also participated in the chase, using his truck to box in Ahmaud and prevent his escape. The video he shot became one of the most damning pieces of evidence against them, turning his role from a bystander to a participant. The trial would take place over a year later, in November 2021, in Glynn County, where the killing had occurred. Questions immediately arose about whether the defendants could receive a fair trial in a county where many knew the McMichaels, and where racial divisions ran deep. Jury selection took weeks. Out of the 12 jurors ultimately selected, 11 were white. This raised alarms, but the judge allowed the panel to stand. The prosecution argued that Ahmaud was targeted because he was a black man running through a predominantly white neighborhood. They presented evidence showing that the McMichaels had made racist comments in the past. Text messages, social media posts, and testimonies painted a picture of men who acted on bias, not reason. The citizen's arrest law they had invoked required the witnessing of a crime, yet there was no such evidence. The defense's claim of self-defense began to unravel under the weight of facts and video. Throughout the trial, the jury watched the video repeatedly. They saw Ahmaud running. They saw the truck block his path. They saw the confrontation, the shotgun raised, the struggle, and the 3 fatal blasts. They heard that he was unarmed. That he never posed a threat. That he was outnumbered and cornered. And they saw the calm with which the defendants spoke to police afterward, confident that their version of events would be believed, unchallenged. The defense tried to argue that Travis McMichael feared for his life when Ahmaud fought back. They described the shooting as a tragic but lawful act. But the jury wasn't convinced. After hours of deliberation, all 3 men were found guilty of murder and other related charges. The verdict was unanimous. Justice, delayed for 74 days, had finally come through the courts. Sentencing followed in early 2022. Travis and Greg McMichael were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. William Bryan received life with the possibility of parole. The courtroom, filled with Ahmaud's family and supporters, erupted in tears. Relief, grief, and vindication blended into a moment that felt both triumphant and tragic. A measure of justice had been served, but at an unbearable cost. In the aftermath of the trial, attention turned to the systems that had failed Ahmaud in the first place. Former District Attorney Jackie Johnson was indicted for obstruction and violating her oath of office. She was accused of showing favoritism to Greg McMichael and interfering with the police investigation. Her arrest sent a strong message: public officials would be held accountable for dereliction of duty, no matter their connections. Georgia lawmakers also took action. The state repealed the Civil War-era citizen's arrest law that had been used to justify the killing. For over 150 years, that law had allowed private individuals to detain others they suspected of crimes. In the wake of Ahmaud's death, legislators acknowledged that the law had been misused and no longer had a place in modern society. Ahmaud's case had already become a national symbol, but now it became a legal turning point as well. It pushed lawmakers to re-evaluate outdated laws, exposed corruption within the local justice system, and forced a conversation about what equal protection under the law truly means. The verdict and the legislation that followed sent a signal, not just to Georgia, but to the nation, that change was possible, even if it came far too late. But for Ahmaud's family, the journey was never just about convictions or courtrooms. It was about ensuring that no other family would endure the same silence, the same cover-up, the same fight for acknowledgement. His death may have been recorded on a cell phone, but his legacy would be recorded in the history of a country still grappling with the consequences of its own prejudices. The aftermath of Ahmaud Arbery's murder rippled far beyond the boundaries of Glynn County, Georgia. His death and the subsequent trial became a catalyst for a national reckoning on race, justice, and the long shadow of America's history of racial violence. What had started as a local tragedy transformed into a symbol of the systemic failures that still permeate the criminal justice system and society at large. Across the country, activists and lawmakers pointed to Ahmaud's case as a stark example of how deep-rooted biases can turn deadly. The idea that a black man jogging in a neighborhood could be viewed as a threat worthy of violent pursuit spoke volumes about the persistent stereotypes and fears that fuel racial profiling. It wasn't just about this one shooting, it was about a pattern where black bodies are often criminalized, surveilled, and attacked under the guise of protecting law and order. The case brought renewed attention to the so-called stand your ground and citizens arrest laws, which in many states grant ordinary citizens broad powers to detain or use force against others they suspect of wrongdoing. These laws had long been criticized for enabling vigilantism and disproportionately harming people of color. Ahmaud's killing highlighted the deadly consequences of such laws when wielded without accountability or clear limits. In response to the tragedy, Georgia lawmakers moved swiftly to repeal the state's citizens' arrest law. What had once been a relic of the Civil War era, designed in a time of overt racial control, was finally dismantled. The repeal was hailed as a significant step forward, not just for Georgia, but as a message to other states with similar statutes. It acknowledged that laws rooted in a racist past cannot stand in a society striving for equality and justice. Beyond legislative changes, Ahmaud Arbery's death ignited a broader cultural shift. The nation's conversations about race and policing intensified. His name was added to the list of victims whose deaths forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about systemic racism and violence. Memorials, murals, and community events in his honor appeared across the country, each one a reminder that the fight for justice was ongoing. Schools, companies, and organizations began reckoning with their own biases, prompted in part by the visibility of cases like Ahmaud's. Training on implicit bias, diversity initiatives, and police reform efforts gained momentum. While these changes were far from comprehensive, they signaled an increasing awareness of the deep-rooted inequalities that must be addressed to prevent future tragedies. Ahmaud's family became advocates for justice, determined to turn their grief into change. They worked with civil rights groups to push for reforms and to support victims of racial violence. Their courage in speaking out transformed personal pain into a public mission, inspiring others who had suffered similar losses. Through their advocacy, Ahmaud's legacy extended beyond the courtroom and into the ongoing struggle for racial justice. The legal system itself faced scrutiny. The prosecution of the McMichaels and Bryan was seen by many as a rare instance where justice was served in a racially charged case, but it also underscored how often the system fails. The delay in arrests, the conflicts of interest among prosecutors, and the initial attempts to cover up the crime illustrated the systemic barriers that make equal justice elusive. Reform advocates seized on this case to argue for greater transparency, accountability, and community oversight of law enforcement and prosecutorial conduct. On a broader scale, Ahmaud's murder contributed to a national movement demanding changes to policing policies and the dismantling of systemic racism. The protests that followed his death merged into the larger demonstrations after George Floyd's murder, creating one of the largest civil rights movements in decades. The energy of these protests compelled some cities to rethink police budgets, implement new use of force policies, and invest in community-based alternatives. Yet, amid these efforts, the realities remained complex. Progress was uneven, and resistance persisted. Many communities and officials clung to old narratives that justified excessive force and racial profiling. The path toward justice was marked by setbacks, revealing how entrenched these problems are. But Ahmaud's story was a beacon, proof that when the truth is exposed, and voices unite, change can be forced. The media coverage of the case also played a critical role in shaping public perception. The power of video evidence had become undeniable, illustrating how citizen-recorded footage could break through institutional silence and demand accountability. Ahmaud's killing, captured on a bystander's phone, was one among many such cases that underscored the importance of transparency and independent documentation in holding perpetrators accountable. At the same time, the widespread attention to Ahmaud's case brought painful reminders of the many victims whose stories never received such attention or justice. His name became a call to action, urging society to recognize and confront the injustices faced daily by Black Americans and marginalized communities. In the years that followed, Ahmaud Arbery's memory continued to inspire legal battles, education campaigns, and policy debates. His death became a symbol of both the deep wounds of racial injustice and the possibility of reform. The fight that his family and supporters waged transformed not only a community but also contributed to a national dialogue that remains vital today. While the pain of losing Ahmaud could never be erased, his legacy challenged a nation to live up to its promises of liberty and justice for all. The story of a young man jogging in his neighborhood, doing something so ordinary, became a powerful reminder that until true equality is achieved, justice will remain a struggle, and the work must continue. Ahmaud Arbery's story is a painful reminder of the urgent need for justice, equality, and change. His life was taken in a moment of fear and prejudice, yet his legacy has sparked a movement that challenges the very systems that allowed this tragedy to happen. As viewers, it's important to remember that behind every headline and viral video is a human being whose life mattered. Ahmaud's death was not just an isolated incident, it reflects a broader struggle against racial bias and injustice that continues today. The fight for reform, accountability, and equal protection under the law is far from over. But through awareness, activism, and unwavering demand for justice, we honor Ahmaud's memory and work to build a future where no one is ever targeted or killed for simply being who they are. If this story moved you, share it, speak up, and stand against injustice wherever you see it. Because change begins when we refuse to stay silent. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real stories that matter.